Okay, let's jump right into this explainer and unpack what is honestly a fascinating corporate mystery. We're talking about the universally accepted excuse for why corporate mergers almost always seem to fall apart. I mean, we read about this in the business news literally all the time, right? Two massive companies announce a merger, there are these huge smiles and firm handshakes around a mahogany table, they promise absolutely revolutionary synergy, and then, boom, a year or two later, the whole thing completely unravels. It's a tale as old as modern business itself. But, the explanations we get when the dust finally settles, they are surprisingly uniform.
So why do these massive deals just evaporate into thin air? Whenever a newly merged company starts bleeding value, or when those promised synergies just vanish, there's this one mysterious culprit that executives are almost always quick to blame. Believe me, leadership teams rarely point the finger at their own strategic missteps or, a miscalculation in the valuation. Instead, they point to a much more elusive scapegoat. And it's the perfect excuse, really, because it sounds incredibly sophisticated, yet it's almost entirely unquantifiable.
If you look at pretty much any survey out there on why M&As fail, cultural differences takes up a massive piece of the pie. It absolutely dominates the conversation. But think about how peculiar that term really is in a corporate context. Cultural differences. It's kind of easy to grasp on a superficial level, but it is nearly impossible to actually describe objectively. Basically, it usually just means the buyer and the target approach the exact same task differently, or they prioritize different outcomes. The result? Anything pushed down from the top ends up backfiring, resentment builds up, and the merger just comes to naught. Well, today, we're going to bring some much-needed objectivity to this whole situation.
Which brings us to reality one. Everyday friction is not M&A exclusive.
Look, we really need to stop treating cultural friction like it's some exotic disease that only strikes when two companies combine. If you look closely at literally any single organization, you're going to find these exact same fault lines everywhere. Seriously, think about your own company right now. You'll likely find salespeople who absolutely detest the product managers, who in turn can't seem to get along with the engineering department. You'll see management teams totally losing their finger on the pulse of the larger organization. You've got millennials with one work ethic, Gen Z with another, and older generations just wondering why everyone is communicating strictly through memes on Slack. Friction is everywhere. Yet, here's the fascinating part. If a standalone company goes under, you will almost never hear cultural issues between sales and engineering getting the blame. But with M&A, there's this bizarre eagerness to play up the cultural differences angle as the ultimate reason for failure.
And that leads perfectly into reality 2, unmasking the turf war.
Let's just strip away all the polite corporate jargon for a second. The term cultural differences is so often just this vague, opaque buzzword used to describe a basic lack of consensus. When we just throw our hands up in the air and say, well, the cultures just didn't mesh, we're completely blinding ourselves to the actual mechanics of the failure. We let ourselves off the hook. We stop analyzing the real mechanical breakdowns and relational tensions happening right there on the office floor.
Because it really isn't about one team liking open-plan collaborative spaces and the other preferring quiet cubicles. What we're actually looking at is a primal turf war over power and control. And frankly, realizing this is a total light bulb moment. It's an entirely natural human response when territories suddenly overlap. When we call it culture, we are essentially just masking a very predictable battle for authority.
You can see this reflexive behavior play out perfectly on both sides of the aisle. The buyer wants to assert their authority, right? While the target desperately pulls the other way to maintain their autonomy. Imagine a legacy bank buying a nimble tech startup. The bank just spent an absolute fortune, so they want to impose their writ visibly to prove, hey, we're in charge. The startup, meanwhile, wants to preserve the exact way it operated pre-M&A because, well, that's what made them valuable and agile in the first place. This is purely about power. It's an automatic, reflexive behavior. You pull this way, I'm going to pull the other way.
It turns out the best managers totally understand this. They know this intense jockeying for power is as old as humanity itself, and to confuse it for some inherent cultural difference is simply losing the plot. The post-M&A period is an incredibly intense time where this jockeying for turf reaches its absolute peak. And here's a really tough pill to swallow. It cannot be fully addressed pre-M&A. Honestly, it doesn't matter how well you carve out roles on paper, or how well the leadership of both organizations get along over fancy dinners during the acquisition process. Once those papers are signed, the turf war begins. But again, calling that perfectly predictable human behavior a cultural difference is entirely missing the point.
Let's shift gears to reality 3, why differences are actually good.
Even if genuine differences aren't just a disguised turf war, why on earth do we automatically assume they're toxic? The source material uses this fantastic, almost theatrical phrase here, unwarranted wallowing in pathos. Executives so often overdo the whole doom and gloom routine when two businesses operate differently. But different methods don't automatically lead to bad outcomes. Having different businesses within a newly merged group that operate differently absolutely does not have to be seen as a negative. In fact, it might just be the secret ingredient to the portfolio's overall strength.
We so frequently underestimate how a target organization's unique practices were the exact reason for their success in the first place. I mean, really think about it. You bought this company because they were doing something right. They were successful, profitable, or innovative enough to catch your eye and your checkbook. And yet, the immediate instinct is almost always to strip away the exact operational quirks and practices that drove that success, all in the name of looking unified. Let me tell you, stripping away those unique quirks just for the sake of cultural alignment is a surefire way to destroy the very value you literally just purchased.
So instead of trying to homogenize everything into one boring mold, leaders really need to embrace this simple truth. Sometimes, the absolute best management strategy is non-interference. There is immense, tangible value in just letting things be. You do not need to force every single department to use the exact same software, follow the exact same communication protocols, or share the exact same corporate values. If it isn't broken, and it disrupts what makes them effective, don't force a cultural alignment that actually just destroys value.
Moving into our final section, rethinking post-M&A success.
So, what's the big takeaway from this explainer for your own corporate strategies? How do we actually move forward and make mergers work if we're finally tossing the cultural differences excuse out the window? Well, first things first, stop hiding behind the vague excuse of culture. Accept the natural power dynamics and focus instead on aligning your newly merged teams around concrete, definite goals. Let the turf wars happen. Manage them, expect them for sure, but don't mislabel them. For leadership, the goal shouldn't be to force everyone to hold hands and sing the corporate anthem. The goal should be to find better, more definite things to align on or standardize for success. Standardize your financial reporting, standardize your legal compliance, sure, but let the operational workflows breathe.
Next time you're looking at the business headlines tomorrow, ask yourself what those executives are really fighting over. When you see a CEO step down citing cultural misalignment with a new parent company, read between the lines. Was it really the culture, or was it just a good old-fashioned battle for control that somebody finally lost? Keep that in mind, and I promise you, you'll view the corporate world with a whole new level of clarity.